And then in 2010, right as the Rendell administration was leaving and the Corbett administration was coming in, there was a recognition by the public sector union leadership and truthfully by the governor's administration. We did have a funding problem coming and it was going to be big. So something called Act 120 was passed, and there are a couple of, in your packets there are two sets of talking points about Act 120. Again, you don't need to understand the technicalities of it or what it all did in terms of concessions, but suffice it to say that Act 120 was something that required a lot of concessions by the employees in the funds and also was bipartisan. It was something that was supported by both sides of the aisle, and there was a huge amount of work and effort that went into getting to that place. So what it didn't do, fortunately, was replace the defined benefit pension system with a defined contribution system. That was something that was being bandied about. It also didn't create a choice, and we all know in our workplaces, when you have tiers of benefits, it makes it very hard inside the shop. When you've got one person who has this pension benefit and one person who has that pension benefit, it makes a mess. We're trying to avoid that, and we did. And it did reduce benefits for current employees, and it at that time the multiplier, does everybody here have a defined benefit pension? Probably. You're all kind of nodding. Okay. See, when I say multiplier, you know what I mean. So when we stepped back the multiplier, and I should also tell you, nobody in the state employee pension funds has received a cost of living adjustment, a COLA, since 2000. So there already is a flaw in the system in that cost of living adjustments weren't built in. And all you really need to know about Act 120 is that concessions were made, and we're kind of down to the bone here. There's not a lot more that we, as public employees who don't make piles of money, can give back. So, next slide, please. Number one is really important for you to understand. When we say employer contribution holiday, that truly does mean that the employers, and in this case the Commonwealth, didn't make any payments to the funds for, in some cases, years. So even though at the time in the 2000s when the markets were going really good and the investment income was significant in the state employee pension funds, because they didn't make their payments, a lot of school districts and municipalities took that off their balance sheet. We don't need to make these pension payments for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or we're only going to make a small pension payment instead of paying what they should have paid. So you all know with your household budgeting, if you suddenly stop paying your mortgage for 3 years and then try to put that back in the balance sheet, that causes a lot of pain. Significantly seen by what was going to happen in 2012, right before the reforms, there was going to be a huge spike in what the individual municipalities were going to have to pay in order to catch up the system. And again, the technicalities don't matter, but it was coming, and it was going to be really ugly, not only politically, but also for the taxpayer, who may or may not have any idea why they suddenly saw their property taxes increase. And this committed employers have stepped up contributions. Basically that means that the employers, the Commonwealth, had to agree that they could no longer not only take a holiday, but they couldn't pay like little tiny fractions. They needed to make their payments, which is the pain we're all feeling now. And rate collars, you'll hear about this because Corbett is talking about relaxing the collars. We'll get into that later. It's not that important, but it could be. Okay, next slide. Thank you. This, you don't have to be a mathematician. This is bad. This goes from 5% of payroll up to almost 35% of payroll. So if you are sitting on a school board and you don't know anything about pension funding, you don't need to. All you need to know is that you're going to go for your own budget an increase of almost 30%. And even if it's only for 20 employees, it's still significant. So this was what we were trying to avoid. Next slide, please, sir. Act 120 made the pain a little bit less. But this is still a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money, and we can't dismiss that fact. But again, the reality is, this is debt that's already been accrued by the Commonwealth. There is no avoiding this. And we'll get into later on how I think we can avoid having to raise taxes in order to pay for this stuff. Okay, next. So, I don't know if our PSV friends want to talk a little bit about this, but this is some of the significant changes that were made. Dropping the multiplier, when it says the member pays full cost difference, what I understand that to be is currently school employees pay
7.5% for the 2.5.
Yep.
They'll continue to, the new employees will pay 7.5% for the 2% multiplier. And if they want the option of the 2.5, they'll pay 10.3.
That's right.
So now you have two classes of employees, 10.3 if they want the same benefit as people who is 7.5. You do have a mistake on there though.
Okay.
3.
What is it?
Elimination of option 4 lump sum withdrawals. That was not included in the legislation. That is one thing that Corbett wants to do in this round.
Okay.
But under 120, number 3 did not occur.
Okay, that's good to know. I actually got this from PSC. That's
Well,
okay though. That's okay.
It doesn't,
That's all right.
doesn't surprise me, probably
Yeah.
came from headquarters.
So,
You know how management is.
so again, particularly
Wait a
for
minute.
people who are in the building trades, just so everybody understands, we're talking about 7.5% of your wage, or 10% of your wage. And that is not something, in many states, like in my home state of Wisconsin, that was actually something that was bargained, and the employer would make that contribution on my behalf. No, no, no. These are people actually paying this out of every paycheck, so that's really important to know. Increasing the age of retirement, changing the vesting period to 10 years from 5 years. So you will hear about how Governor Ridge changed the vesting period when he was governor. He pushed it back from 10 to 5 years. And he did that, people will say, because he wanted his people, all the people who worked in his administration for 8 years, to be able to be vested. If you were at a 10-year vest, all of his staff wouldn't have been vested in the state employee pension. It was changed to 5. Excuse me, it was changed back to 10 from 5.
That's how he got the job as Homeland. He started as homeboy security. That's why he did that.
Homeboy security, very nice. I hadn't heard that one before. So next slide. I mean, I don't think we need to belabor this, other than for you to know what the changes were. And again, this is an ugly-looking chart that shows a lot of the cost associated with these payments is because of the debt we've already accrued. Unfunded liability is a fancy way of saying debt that the Commonwealth is on the hook for regardless. Unless all of the state employees currently collecting pension benefits say, nope, I don't need my pension check, you can keep the money, no problem. Obligations already accrued, okay? So, this is a little bit of an oversimplification. Pension reform can only have a marginal impact on the challenge at hand. That is true in that all of the different fixes and reforms that are being promoted right now by the governor or by whomever that's supporting him aren't going to make a dent in the debt. Moving forward, if they cut benefits for current employees, it does lower their obligations and it will bring down the accrual of debt a little bit, but it doesn't make a difference. And in my opinion, it is not worth years and years of litigation and ugly lawsuits to try to figure out if we can save a teeny tiny bit of money. It's just not even worth it. I believe, and I may be an extreme, but I believe that the goal of the Corbett administration, not the General Assembly and not the people who've been elected into the State House for years and years, the goal of the Corbett administration is to implode the plans. Why? Aside from the fact that they are expensive, that is a big win for him politically He is desperate to hold on to another 4 years as governor of Pennsylvania. He's read the polls. He knows that the public is not with us. This is what he is going to hang his hat on, saving the taxpayers' money by getting rid of those pesky public workers' pensions. And if he's lucky, ramming through right to work or some other horrible legislation and just getting rid of public sector unions altogether. So that's a very real, I think, possibility if we budge on Act 120 at this juncture. And we're going to talk about when I think we can budge, but not right now. Okay. So these are some of the proposed changes. We all know that number one would probably, even the most cynical of the public would not agree. All savings, all retirement vehicles for public sector workers, and again, this is several 100,000 people, just do away with it completely. It's pretty extreme. There will be a few people who would support that. Probably not a huge number, but that's out there. There are actually like over 30 pension bills and pieces of legislation that are being bandied around. It's probably even way more than that by now. Defined contribution plan, we all are familiar with that. A potential for a choice between a defined benefit and defined contribution is something that's happening in the city of Philadelphia, I know, and other places. So that's also certainly out there, and that's a threat to the whole system. A hybrid plan, or a stacked plan, maybe some of you are already in a stacked plan, allows for some defined benefit and some 401k style savings. And then this is something that nobody knows about, nobody understands. Cash balance, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. When you hear the governor talking about his proposed plan, he's talking about a 401A, not a 401K. A 401A is different from a 401K in the way the IRS looks at your pension benefit as a public worker versus a private sector worker. But what we are being told, now again, the governor has been very, very cagey on the details of what his proposal is. What we're being told, what our lobbyists are being told, is that his 401A plan is actually a cash balance plan, which I'll tell you about in a second. But this is kind of the menu right now, what we're looking at. This chart, again, is a lot of detail, but suffice it to say, a typical PSERS retired teacher receives a pension benefit after 35 years of service, and if this is was their finishing salary, the average of their last 3 years, right? $80,000, $53,000, 748. Okay, that is approximately probably 70 to 75% of their final wage, which most people will say is a reasonable floor, an expectation that you should have as a person who has worked your life. When you retire, you should have about 75 or 80% of your final income in order to survive, okay? And of course, we all know this goes on until you leave the planet. Cash balance, which is again what we believe, now they're calling this a 401A, but I think they're just kind of mixing it up a little bit again to confuse people. Cash balance is what what you pay in, what your employer pays in, plus a fixed rate of return for the earnings on the money that you invest in the system. Average for a defined benefit pension system is 7.5%. What they're guaranteeing you is a 4% return. So any amount of money any amount of investment income that your pension monies earn over the life of your employment, say 35 years, goes back into the general fund. And they're going to use that money to pay down the debt. So basically, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would be saying to you, let us take 7.5% of your salary for 30 years, okay? We're going to allegedly make 5% contributions on your behalf as your employer. Again, this could be changed, this could be fudged, and we're going to guarantee you this rate of return, and that's it. So people will say, oh, but there's going to be a dividend, blah, 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 blah. The money Anything over and above that goes back into the general fund either to pay down the debt or do something else with. So they're gonna use your money to generate income to spend on something else. This to me is perverse. I'd almost rather go in a 401k than know that the Commonwealth gets to take my income, my earnings, and spend it on something else. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good. Great. Okay, thank you. So why now? The liability does have to be dealt with. You'll hear it over and over again, and it's true. It's about $500 million that the Commonwealth owes this budget, starting July 1, in new pension payments over and above what they were already obligated to pay just by their standard payment schedules. It's a lot of money. But if we owed $500 million to Shell Oil, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They would find the money. That's why we're having the public conversation, because somehow Governor Corbett has been led to believe by his advisors or others that if he throws this back in the public to have a big ugly public debate about it, we can avoid having that fight with him, because the public will overwhelm him with, yeah, support the taxpayers, save the taxpayers, and forget about those public employees. That, again, is a very cynical view, but that's kind of what this is. $500 million in the whole big Pennsylvania budget is actually not even that much money. And there's something called the Clear Coalition, which I really encourage you to take a look at, and I'm going to pass around right now one additional handout for you all. Clear Coalition was established by all of the public sector, by all the public sector unions in order to talk about expanding the pie, looking for additional sources of revenue, instead of this constant sort of austerity and the let's all keep expecting working people to do more and more and more and more with less and less and less and less resources. It's just not sustainable, and you all know that. But this is a really important part of the conversation. And again, we as the union don't want to lead with, yes, raise taxes so you can fund our pension benefits. But that's not really how it works anyways. So I would definitely take a look at the Clear Coalition website. There's a couple of pages of talking points of different loopholes that can be closed. You probably heard about the Delaware loophole. There was a short article yesterday after the budget address about the secret or very quiet corporate tax breaks that Corbett is giving away. So we all know that the money is out there. It's just that he's making a political calculation to not spend it on us and to spend it on Shell Oil or whoever. And I wouldn't say this is, I said arbitrarily have made pension reform the #1 priority. I don't think it's arbitrary. I think they know that they have a political winner in the eyes of the public. So unfortunately, I don't think it's totally arbitrary. Okay, this is really one of my favorite quotes from the governor. There are many, I have like a catalog now, but this says, this is in reference to the pension debt. I equate that to a Pac-Man or a tapeworm eating up the budget, Corbett said. I do not see the economy growing at that kind of rate, and even if it did, it would just keep us even. If we do not address this pension issue now, we will be worrying about how we will pay for the pensions and won't be able to pay for other needed services. So not only is he comparing us to tapeworms, really, what he's doing by diverting the conversation is, again, I think I said it earlier, this is sort of like the deadbeat dad who doesn't want to make his child support payments. Let's blame the victim. This is crazy, but this is his narrative, and this is what he's going to repeat time and time again. It's kindergarten or pension payments. Pretty soon it's going to be, we aren't going to be able to breathe the air if we make these pension payments. I mean, this is going to go crazy. So luckily, again, this really makes people mad when they say this, which is useful, which is why I'm sharing all with you. Hopefully it'll make you mad too. Okay, next. And this was even more illustrative this morning. So our Senate Majority Leader, Dominic Pileggi, I'm sure some of you or many of you have heard of him, said this yesterday in the newspaper. I think personally that we can't continue to have a public sector retirement plan which is defined benefit while the private sector continues to move every day towards defined contributions, said Pileggi. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think taxpayers will continue to accept a different retirement plan for government employees paid for with their tax dollars than they have themselves. Whether we're gonna change this year or next year or 5 years from now, I don't think the current model is sustainable. Now, if the private sector comes back to the defined benefit world, then maybe it is sustainable. But the trends don't seem to be going in that direction.
Yeah.
He doesn't think. This man is not an actuary, he is not a mathematician, and this is his personal opinion about our ability to have a retirement plan. This, again, is crazy to me. His personal opinion is X, Y, and Z, and hopefully I'll be able to prove to you some more that everything that Corbett is talking about doing makes the debt worse and will cost the taxpayers more money. This is the issue. They don't want us to have defined benefit pensions because, again, this is what separates total domination of the far right from, it's unions. It's about unions, it's about collective bargaining rights, and it's about pensions, period. And this is a really good reflection of that.